Welcome back. We take a closer look at the day's market action now with Viv Govender from Rand Swiss Offshore. Thank you so much for your time, Viv. Of course, the big news for the day being that gold reached another record high, breaching that $4,000 mark per ounce. Is this a sound of alarm bells ringing?
Possibly, but remember, it's not just a gold story, it's a dollar story as well. So if you look at the rand to dollar level, basically we are sitting at about just under 17.20, and if you look at where we've been for the last couple of years, that 17.20 is a pretty strong level for the rand versus the US dollar. The stuff that's happening with the shutdown, etc., I think is kind of hurting global sentiment and making people a bit fearful about the world. And in that scenario, obviously people want to hold some safe haven assets, which gold is obviously the premier one.
And actually, I'm just wondering, as much as now we are seeing kind of concerns over the extension of the shutdown, I'm wondering if the Fed minutes tomorrow could make things better, considering that those are from the meeting in which Powell cut rates.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's obviously important. I think the market's been incredibly aggressive in terms of predicting rate cuts going forward. Obviously things like the shutdown do actually help the case for rate cuts, because it means that the economy is probably going to have less demand, it's going to be a bit weaker, and that's going to basically mean that, cutting rates will be going to be a good thing. On the other hand, you must also remember that the dollar weakening means that the US is importing a lot more inflation than it was in the past, and that's going to obviously work in the other factor as well. We are seeing, obviously, the Fed right now being a bit uncertain about what's going to happen going forward. And we said because at a number of the last meetings, we've seen significant numbers of dissents, more than we've seen in the last couple of decades.
Viv, just going back to that gold story, what's interesting is that as much as we saw that record high in the gold price, our JSE gold miners shares are down on the day. Why?
Yeah, look, I mean, today we see, for instance, one of the big movers down is the DRD gold. But if you look year to date, this thing is up almost triple. It's up 197%. So it's almost triple the price year to date. So we've already had a pretty strong rally. And this is the last month or so. We're talking a 33% rise up in DRD gold's price. So even though it's one of the biggest fallers today, this is a case where the market's priced in a lot already. And I think maybe the fact that we're just still bouncing off just under the $4,000 dollar ounce level might be one thing. The other thing, like I said, the rand is a bit stronger, which is obviously these companies are measured in rands, it's not measured in dollars. So it's the rand gold price that matters more than the dollar gold price.
All right. Well, let's get into some of the JSE company news that came out today. Afrimat coming out with an interim trading statement. The share price climbing about 4% after the release of that statement. The commodities and construction materials company saying that it expects its headline earnings per share to rise by as much as 95%. A lift in the performance in its different divisions. Is the tide turning after its down cycle that we had seen recently?
Yeah, look, I mean, year to date, this stock is down almost 40%. And I think if it wasn't for the fact that we had a massive rally today, we'd be down more than 40% for the year. So the market has obviously looked at this stock with a bit of a concern. The fact that we're seeing a surge in earnings is obviously a good thing. I do think that, some of the stuff that we're seeing around the commodity sector is quite interesting. I mean, obviously, we know what's happening with chrome, what's happening with copper as well out there. I think right now the markets are basically trying to get the right valuations in for some of these commodities, and they are a bit, in a bit of a flux at the moment. So yeah, I mean, it is a nice little recovery today, but like I said, considering the fact that we're down 40% almost, even with the recovery, it's not too much to be expected.
Yeah, and actually I see that there was more buying activity there with the share price up on the day by 11%. Well, another company that we saw the share price shooting up by about 12% is DataTech after releasing its half-year trading update, also posting gains and improvements compared to the prior comparative period, saying that it expects its bottom line to accelerate by more than 100%. They didn't give us color in this particular update. What's your reading of that performance?
This is the opposite. This is good news being, so good that even after rallying, quite strongly for the year, the share price is up. It's up about 40% for the year, and before this thing was up almost 30%. I do think that if you look at this particular company over the last few years, it's been a really strong performer. And I do think that if you look at some of the technology stuff happening out there, things like AI and so on, many companies are going to need their hand held basically to incorporate this new technology. I mean, it's obviously very powerful, but it's also very new. People don't know how to do things as yet. So I think they're spending it in IT It's probably going to be, quite strong going forward. I mean, I saw, for instance, in the US, some incredible numbers on AI. For instance, this year in the US, 40% of all the GDP growth in the US was AI related, and 80% of stock market improvements was related to the AI stocks. So obviously, this is a tsunami that's hitting the world at the moment, and if you're going to be helping people navigate it, it's obviously going to be a profitable industry to be in.
All right. Well, Viv, let's get to your stock pick for today. Where are you finding value?
Finding value in a company called Micron. It is a company that makes what's called bandwidth memory. Another company that does it is SK Hynix, the one that we know is Samsung. Their price is up, quite dramatically, over 100% this year. But if you look at things like, Nvidia, AMD, all stocks that are going up, dramatically over the last little while. One of the biggest things they spend money on is this high bandwidth memory. There's only a couple of places in the world that make them, a couple of companies that make them. SK Hynix, like the Korean company, Samsung is kind of like entering it, but it's still not at this point where it's like really competitive in the area. And Micron, and I think if you go thinking that where some of the valuations for things like Nvidia are and AMD are, it might just be worth it to have some of the other stocks that are basically selling into these companies as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your insights on what has moved investors' money today, Viv. That was Viv Govender from Rancis Offshore.